Welcome to the CTIA 5G Summit Policy Program. I'm Scott Bergman, Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at CTIA, and this is one of our 2 Washington Talks wireless sessions. Now in today's panel, we're going to talk with the wireless experts who advise 2 of the 5 FCC commissioners and the head of NTIA about the issues that are driving wireless policy. So to frame the conversation, the wireless world has been focused on 2 key objectives in 2020. Promoting robust 5G deployment across the US and rising to the challenge of COVID-19. Our 5G efforts have really been focused on the critical need to bring more mid-band spectrum to market for our industry and speeding siting processes so that providers can build and invest more quickly. Now, 2020 also brought the challenge of COVID-19. The pandemic, the need for social distancing have changed the way that we live, the way that we do conferences, and certainly the way that we communicate. So joining us today, we have Will Adams, who's legal advisor to FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, Bill Davenport, who's senior legal advisor to Commissioner Geoffrey Starks, and Derek Khlopin, who's senior advisor to Acting Assistant Secretary Adam Kandu. Welcome to all 3 of you. I want to start with COVID-19 and recognizing the hardships and losses that the pandemic has created. I think a bright light has been the performance of US wireless networks. Despite surges in traffic, changes in traffic patterns, new use cases, wireless networks have really risen to the challenge. While many other countries saw their network performance dip, or in some cases plunge, here in the US, wireless performance held steady and even increased over time. So Will and Derek, I want to turn to you because both the FCC and NTIA have taken a number of steps to make sure that consumers stay connected and that wireless providers have the resources they need to meet those consumer needs. So Will, Derek, I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about what steps you've taken, what was impactful, and then drawing back the lens a little bit, what lessons can we learn from the strong performance that we saw from US wireless networks? Will, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, and thanks, Scott, for having us here today, and hope everyone in your family and everyone else's around here and at home are doing well through all of this. Before I worked at the FCC, I worked on other infrastructure matters at a bank in New York, sewers, water, roads, and bridges. And one of the things folks in those types of infrastructure say is that infrastructure breaks slowly and quietly and then all at once. The idea being that without the day in, day out maintenance and investment in infrastructure, you won't know that it's not working until it really doesn't. And I think the reverse is true too. Sometimes you don't know how good of infrastructure you have until it's tested all at once. And we saw that test with wireless infrastructure this year. The American story of networks performing is a really great one and compares favorably to a lot of our peers. It actually turned out after the different steps that the FCC and NTIA and private industry took that speeds improved over the course of the pandemic, even though use shifted immediately in ways that were unforeseen. So at the FCC, we took a few steps to try to help facilitate and help our partners in the private sector provide service to the Americans we all serve. The first thing we did was we lit up and found extra spectrum that was not being used. And we found it with a bunch of owners who had spectrum that hadn't been deployed, and we identified that spectrum and we approved very promptly spectrum swaps and spectrum leases, temporary spectrum leases. We also looked into our own inventory at the FCC and looked around for unused spectrum that could be put to use right away. On the infrastructure side, this pandemic has hit local governments, tribal governments, and those who are involved in the approval of infrastructure really hard. And so a lot of their offices were closed and a lot of those approvals ground to a halt. The FCC worked with those governments, both tribal governments and local governments, to provide emergency authorizations for critical infrastructure specifically targeted at augmenting capacity to help deal with the crisis. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the work that industry and particularly CTIA did to put together best practices to help the local governments who are, again, struggling under all of this with so many different pressures, find ways to efficiently approve wireless spectrum and wireless infrastructure projects such that we can, again, increase capacity and continue service.
Thanks, Will. Do you want to talk a little bit about NTIA's role?
Sure, and thank you, Scott. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and represent NTIA, and of course, hope everybody out there is staying safe. I certainly agree. It's impressive performance by the wireless industry, as you led off with, and Will acknowledged. From the federal government perspective, we've really had a whole of government response to support industry through these times. I think across the executive branch, we've seen some efforts, whether it's DHS being spot on at the outset to include telecommunications and wireless in the essential critical infrastructure workers guidance. From the NTIA perspective, we've done a number of things. We'll reference the FCC finding more spectrum, and some of those involved shared spectrum that we coordinated with the FCC through our NTIA role of managing federal spectrum use, and there were a lot of requests that came in, and this was primarily in some of the AWS-3 spectrum that hadn't been put to use yet, and as well as in 5.9 gigahertz. And that entailed getting our engineers to work with engineers from the federal agencies that were affected to make sure that there weren't going to be interference concerns. And we were able to turn a lot of that spectrum, make it available. And we're really pleased to see that did make a difference in network performance, both in terms of sometimes adding to a geographic area or increasing capacity. So really exciting that those took the form of STAs, or special temporary authorities in those cases. Another thing NTIA did this summer was we have NTIA's Minority Broadband Initiative, and we participated in a number of virtual town halls with historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and tribal colleges and universities to hear about how COVID was impacting their institutions, their students, their professors, and so we're hoping some of those learnings will be turned into policy actions. And then finally a little bit about FirstNet. So NTIA oversees FirstNet, which is the nationwide public safety broadband network. Certainly a very active time for FirstNet during this period, leveraging the over 1.5 million connections now on the FirstNet network, and over 13,000 plus public safety agencies that take advantage of the network now, and a lot of them, thousands of them, reached out to FirstNet for support, and this included everything from enabling Wi-Fi hotspots, so 911 dispatchers could work remotely, to a lot of connectivity options around, COVID-19 testing sites and incident control, and really found this to be pretty interesting, and a lot of innovations that happened there as well. For example, FirstNet put into use some devices that could be disinfected with bleach and things like that really were hardened for those purposes, and applications that would enable first responders to get sort of an incident on the ground, what a scene was like before they came in there. So, I think we saw some recent comments from FirstNet executives who have realized that, the medical community now is, have these closer relationships they anticipate to have going forward. So a lot of activity and a lot of good work, again, to support, good industry performance during this time.
Thanks, Derek. So, Bill, I want to turn to you. I think one of the things that COVID-19 has shown is just how important it is to have access. And I'm wondering if you can help us understand how COVID-19 is going to shape communications policy going forward as we try to make sure that the folks who don't have connectivity yet get access to it.
Oh, thank you, Scott, and thank you for having me. I share my colleagues' good wishes to everybody, and I hope everyone's staying safe. COVID-19 has really highlighted, as you alluded to, existing problems that really were not getting enough attention, particularly with respect to the digital divide. Because everyone is forced to stay at home, people are working from home, kids are learning, distance learning at the kitchen table rather than the classroom. People are not able to visit their doctor, so they have to participate in telehealth visits. Those without broadband access really have suffered in pretty profound ways. And so one of the things that my boss has been particularly focused on is making sure that the commission is taking extra steps to make sure that everyone has broadband that needs it. And one of the things that we're particularly interested in during the COVID crisis and then extended beyond it is the question of affordability. The commission and other agencies have done a good job about getting broadband to rural areas, and there still are too many people that are without access. But there are large portions of the country and cities where people have access to broadband service, but for whatever reason haven't participated and haven't engaged with it. In fact, according to one study, there's 18 million households that actually have chosen not to get broadband because it's just simply not affordable. And we expect that the actual number may be much higher. So my boss is really focused on the idea that the Commission needs to be taking steps to increase the affordability of broadband service, whether it's wireless service, whether it's wireline service, and really just try to work with industry and with Congress to take steps to increase affordable access. One of the things that industry did a great job about with respect to COVID is the Keep Americans Connected pledge, where the chairman's office worked with industry to make sure that people weren't getting disconnected. In addition, a lot of ISPs also announced or expanded their plans for low-income broadband service. And those are all really great programs, but for many Americans, those programs really aren't enough, or they aren't reached by those programs. So our focus over the next year and in beyond is really going to be about increasing affordable options within communities that have broadband to try to reach those folks so that when the next crisis happens, they are connected and they're able to participate in all the things that are moved online as a result of COVID.
Well, thanks to all three of you for the work that your agencies are doing to help address this challenge. We really appreciate it, and I think it makes it all the more impressive how you've kept your focus on the second key objective for 2020, speeding the deployment of 5G as broadly as we can throughout the U.S. It really is remarkable that today we have 2 nationwide 5G networks, a third on the way, and that's due to a lot of private investment, literally billions and billions of dollars of private investment, but it's also due to having a regulatory framework that promotes investment, that promotes deployment, that promotes competition. Will, I want to start with you. Commissioner Carr has really championed efforts to modernize the infrastructure siting processes that exist. What are the most important steps that the FCC has taken, and what impact do you see from those efforts?
Yeah, that's been a focus of his. He's led the FCC's wireless infrastructure agenda over the last nearly 3 years. In 2018, we passed 2 major orders that addressed small cell siting, and we spent a lot of 2019 defending those orders in court, and I'm proud to say successfully defending those orders in court. We're beginning to see the results already. According to an audit we've done internally as to the pace of small cell construction, since those 2 orders went into effect, we're seeing triple the number of small cell applications going through our systems each month. And what's even more interesting and I think encouraging is that we're seeing quadruple the number of places that are getting small cells. So our concern at the Commission is not just about providing next generation service to urban areas and areas that are likely to get 5G regardless of the economics, but we're really interested in seeing that service spread out to all of America so that no one gets left behind. And so we're really encouraged by those first results. We didn't stop there, though. In the past year, we've redoubled our efforts for macro siting. And earlier this year, we passed an order that basically allows more co-locations and allows an easier process for co-locating. So in other words, using existing wireless towers and updating the equipment, taking off old equipment, putting on new equipment. In a week, the Commission, at the next Commission's meeting, we will finish some work on that and allow for a modest expansion of macro tower sites to accommodate next generation services. Mobile edge computing requires a little more space on some towers, as well as backup power, which is important to all users, but particularly public safety and FirstNet that Derek mentioned.
Thanks very much, Will. So Bill, you talked a little bit about Commissioner Stark's focus on making sure that every American can participate and enjoy the benefits of 5G. I'm hoping you might drill down a little bit on, are there particular challenges you think we should be focused on first? You talked a little bit about the importance of low-income consumers getting access. And are there particular steps that you think policymakers should be focused on to make that happen?
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, it's I think the Commission has done a good job in many respects in responding to COVID. And, Will and Derek for NTIA, addressed some of the spectrum issues and the waiver issues that the Commission has taken on. And the NTIA has taken on. But one of the things that my boss has been frustrated about is the failure to act in areas where we believe the Commission has authority, but has not taken action. So with respect to the Lifeline program, for example, we believe that the Lifeline program is something that is really essential for the poorest Americans. It provides 1,000 minutes of voice service and 3 gigabytes of data per month. And that program was already, I think, inadequate in many respects. But as COVID has happened and so many activities have moved online, a lot of folks who are participating in this program simply can't, the benefits just don't meet the need, to meet the moment. 1,000 minutes of voice sounds fine in a lot of ways, but if you're stuck on hold for an hour at a time trying to get through to your doctor's office, it becomes more and more problematic. 3 gigabytes of data sounds fine as well, but when you are, basically doing everything online or streaming videos to be able to do a telehealth visit or connect with friends or family, there really are serious questions. So my boss has pushed for the FCC to temporarily expand the Lifeline program to really work with the providers so that Lifeline recipients can receive unlimited data and unlimited voice during the duration of the pandemic. Another area that we have some concerns about is with respect to the E-rate program. E-rate provides support to schools and libraries for connections, for broadband connections and some other services. And we believe that the Commission has the authority to actually expand E-rate support to include things like providing connections for students and library patrons from home, since effectively the classroom has now moved to the household. And so, we would like the Commission to take action in those areas. It has not done so. I know Congress is very concerned about it. Ultimately, this may be something that Congress has to act on. But, these are areas where we think it's really critical that government responds. And, we're hopeful that that will happen in the coming future.
Thanks, Bill. So Derek, turning to you, the administration has identified 5G deployment as a national priority, and NTIA has been actively working on spectrum issues, on security issues. Can you tell us a little bit about the most important steps that NTIA is taking to promote 5G deployment?
Sure, and thank you, Scott. Absolutely, 5G is a priority for NTIA, for the Department of Commerce, of which NTIA is a part of, for the Trump administration. I think, we believe 5G is a game changer. But to get it right and let it be the economic engine that we all believe it will be, we do have to get the policies right. You mentioned spectrum and security, and those certainly are two of the way NTIA is focused on moving the ball forward here, along with broadband infrastructure investment. Specifically, we have work being done on broadband mapping. We are now partnered with 22 states on our initiative, with more to come, as well as the American Broadband Initiative, which is an interagency effort across the executive branch to remove obstacles, for example, siting on federal lands and access to federal facilities, trying to, again, move the needle there as well, too. But returning to spectrum, it's an important issue for NTIA. We, are essentially a partner here, the FCC, as co-regulators, if you will, of the spectrum. We, manage the federal spectrum use. So, of course, what this means is we not only have to ensure that the federal agencies have spectrum available for their critical missions that are important to the American people, but to make sure spectrum is being used efficiently and effectively and work to repurpose spectrum for commercial uses, which of course is key to 5G. We also have, as part of the Department of Commerce and NTIA, the Institute for Telecommunications Sciences, ITS, out in Boulder, Colorado, and they do a significant amount of research and work on spectrum sharing and related technologies, and are right now constructing a 5G test bed. So certainly we'll leverage that in this as well. Another key aspect of our spectrum work is international. And again, we partner with the FCC and the State Department on issues at the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, and the World Radio Communications Conference. And WRC 19 last year was important from a global perspective because the industry needs, economies of scale to ensure that equipment costs are brought down and that the U.S. is putting bands in play that have a global ecosystem behind them. So a lot of success there on the last WRC 19 on the millimeter wave bands, the high spectrum, and doing some harmonization there as well. And right now we look forward to working with the Commission on implementing some of those decisions that came out of that, for example, on out-of-band emission limits and other issues. WRC 23 coming up in a few years will focus on mid-band. So obviously that'll be an important effort there as well. You also mentioned security, and that is a very important issue for this administration again, if we want 5G to have the impact it will across sectors, the networks need to be secure. They need to be secure from the outset. And industry is doing a tremendous job in the standards bodies of making sure that happens. But we also have a government interest there as well. And this starts with Congress passed the Secure 5G and Beyond Act, which required the administration to develop a national strategy on secure 5G. Around the same time, the administration did release this strategy, and we right now are working on an implementation plan with 4 lines of effort there. And the act calls on NTIA to work with the White House to implement that. And I could probably spend 20 minutes on that, but I won't. There is another panel on secure 5G, and I have a colleague, Evelyn Romali, speaking on that. So hopefully folks are able to catch that one as well. I will mention real quick, though, that one of the lines of effort there in the initiatives is around promoting vendor diversity, which is important to 5G, both from a competition and innovation perspective. And I think we're working real actively from the administration perspective with international partners on this as well, too. And what we're really hoping that there's an evolution to an open, interoperable 5G ecosystem. So we have the greatest opportunity for supplier diversity out there as well, too. And finally, speaking of supply chain, there's work within the Department of Commerce. NTIA supports the Secretary on implementing rules again stemming from an executive order to ensure that the information and communications technology and services supply chain is secure as possible, and we avoid unacceptable risks from national security implications that are from foreign adversaries.
Thank you each for those efforts. I think that's part of why we see the record levels of investment in 5G here in the U.S. and such broad and deep network build out occurring right now in our country. I want to turn to one piece that a couple of you talked about, which is mid-band spectrum. And I just want to do a quick look at some of the key mid-band spectrum priorities that you've been working on. And Derek, why don't I stay with you? In August, the administration proposed that the FCC auction 100 megahertz of spectrum in the lower 3 gigahertz band. This is a band that's being looked at internationally, that's very, very highly valued for 5G. Can you talk about why that effort is important and what our viewers should know about that effort?
Sure. And look, the United States is making tremendous progress in making spectrum available for 5G, right? We had a legacy base of low band spectrum. We spent a number of years working on the high band, the millimeter wave spectrum. And to be fair, some of that was because it was relatively speaking low hanging fruit in terms of the effort to make it available. Like they were certainly not as intensively used. So now, we certainly, hear the industry push for mid-band, and we absolutely agree. It's a little bit of sort of like the Goldilocks tale, right? Where, the low spectrum is great because it, propagates far distances, but you have a lot of capacity. You have the high band spectrum that, has tremendous capacity, but you have some limitations on propagation. So, mid-band's kind of that sweet spot, right? Absolutely hear it. Certainly, it's a priority. You mentioned the 3450, 3550 megahertz announcement in August, and again, working in tandem across the U.S. government with the White House, with the Department of Defense, and with the Commission, and certainly applaud the Commission in September for voting an item out to advance their efforts there as well too. It's important for a number of reasons. I think you can't look at it in isolation, right? So we have CBRS, and again, the Commission's successful auction that just concluded, and they're going to start an auction in the C-band. Put all this together, and you end up, with 530 megahertz of continuous spectrum. So, we hear the call for mid-band. We think it's critical. The work here on 3450 started with, identifying that 100 megahertz out of a broader range of 3100 to 3550, really because even in taking an initial look, it was evident that would be the slice that would be, quote unquote, the easiest to make available. So we focused NTIA efforts to study that and do an initial analysis. The White House then, engaged as well to build on that, work with DoD and put an intensive effort together called the America's Mid-Band Initiative Team, AMBIT, to be able to by August come up with a definitive decision that we're going to make this happen. Not easy, and there's still work to do, and there are issues teed up in the NPRM. And I encourage industry and other stakeholders to work with FCC in that rulemaking and to work with NTIA and DoD as well, because I think it'll take all of us to get that across the finish line. And then just real quickly, I'd also mention unlicensed and 6 gigahertz. All this is going to complement the mid-band activity. So I think it's an exciting time for mid-band. we're excited about 3450, 3550. We know our work is never done. We're looking, pushing on to the next thing, and looking for how we make innovations to make more spectrum available, because we know it's never going to be enough for sure, as demand's just going to continue to grow.
Thanks, Derek. So Will, I want to turn to you, and the FCC has been focused not just on the lower 3 gigahertz band, but also on C-band. It's been a major priority for industry for a number of years and a major focus for the FCC. And I think we're all really excited that there's going to be an auction in December. Can you talk to us, why is this such a priority for the FCC? What needs to happen between now and the auction? And what are you looking forward to from this spectrum?
Well, Derek called millimeter wave low-hanging fruit. C-band was like the opposite of that, high-hanging fruit. I'm not really sure what the metaphor is there. It was a tremendously complicated problem to solve. We had to incent incumbent users who are the satellite companies to become more efficient with their uses of the spectrum. We had this odd, archaic commons sharing regime. And in the middle of all of that, we also wanted to make sure that the taxpayer was fairly compensated. And I think we came to a really great decision. I think it'll be precedent setting, and we can use the tools that we developed in solving that problem to perhaps clear out other spectrum. So we're really excited about that. As you said, we're going to auction here in December. We're on track to have some of the spectrum available for commercial wireless use next year, which is just a tremendously quick timeline. And there are 1,000 steps that we've taken. There are 1,000 more to take. We've dealt with the cost catalog. We've dealt with the transition administrator. But from our check-in with staff, it looks like we are still on track, and we just need to remain focused on, and making sure that the spectrum gets out into the marketplace in short order. We spent so much time on the C-band, and it's tremendously important, but so are so many other bands. As Derek mentioned, if you look more broadly across the entire 3, what we've done with CBRS, what we've done with the C-band, what NTIA and FCC are looking at doing in the lower 3, you begin to see a broader picture of big, wide channels that are fairly clear and able to be used for the kind of high throughput that you expect from 5G. We're very excited about that, and we intend to continue to look around and find available megahertz by megahertz available for terrestrial commercial use.
Thanks, Will. So Bill, I want to pivot now to a little bit more of a forward look. We all want to see 5G deployed as quickly as possible. We want to make sure that every American can benefit from it. I want to ask you guys in 30 seconds or less, what's the single thing that we need to do over the next year in order to make sure that that vision is a reality? Or if you want to flip it on its head, is there some new idea to promote US competitiveness, to promote 5G deployment that we haven't thought of yet that we should be thinking about? Bill, I'll give you the first take.
Sure. I think that, as I mentioned, and as you alluded to, Scott, affordability is really something that I think has been neglected until recently. We've been so focused on increasing deployments and access, which is a fair, absolutely legitimate policy goal, that affordability has been lost in the shuffle. Americans pay more for their broadband service than many other countries. And there are reasons for that are very complicated, but the bottom line is that a lot of households simply just can't afford it, particularly when you're talking about a situation where you have millions of people who are unemployed, who are underemployed. People are looking at their bills and they're trying to decide, well, I've got, I can either pay my rent or I can subscribe to a broadband service. Also, you have an issue of a lot of households are mobile only. And so one of the things that we're really excited about is the potential for 5G wireless service to the home, fixed wireless service, that could be possibly an alternative to some of the fixed broadband service that is out of reach for many Americans in terms of price. But like I said, I think that the focus that we would like to do over the next year, working with Congress, working with fellow commissioners, is to examine the affordability issue, try to figure out what tools the FCC already has to address affordability. For example, potentially requiring an affordable option for carriers that receive universal service support. But beyond that, there may be tools that Congress can ultimately provide with respect to providing vouchers or other means of essentially making broadband service affordable for most Americans.
Thanks, Bill. Derek, 30 seconds or less? What's
Sure.
the single most important thing you're looking for?
Sure. So thank you. And I don't want this to sound like a cop-out, but I think we're actually on the right track. I think what we need to do is close the deal on a few of these things. Right. We're filling the spectrum pipeline, and we're working to ensure there aren't security vulnerabilities in the 5G infrastructure that hold us back. We're removing obstacles to deployment, and we're targeting funding where we can to ensure that we have build out to all areas. So yeah, more work needs to be done in these areas, but I think that's what we're doing. And then I would just say I think that the real turning point for 5G will be when the applications really emerge that are 5G specific. We can't predict all those. I think that would be folly, but I'm looking forward to the ingenuity and innovation, the American spirit to see what happens there.
The private sector invested more than $29 billion last year in infrastructure. That's without a penny of taxes. That figure has gone up every year over the last 4 years, and we are seeing the results of robust private sector-led investment in our networks. Why would we change course? It's working. And so I think the challenge for leadership going forward is to hit the gas harder, to continue to put forward policies that encourage and foster that private sector investment in the three things that matter here, which are spectrum, infrastructure, and people, the people who make these networks, operate these networks, and build these networks. I think we have a tremendous success story, and I think we should continue doing it.
Well, thank you all. You've given us quite a list as we look to make sure that we've got the right input and framework to promote 5G. Bill, Will, Derek, I want to thank you for being part of today's panel. I hope we see you all again soon. And to our audience, we hope you enjoy the rest of the CTIA 5G Summit. And thank you for joining us today.